Something unbelievable happened in a dusty, sun-scorched strip mall parking lot on a day that started like any other, but ended in chaos so wild it'd make your heart pound and your jaw drop. Picture this: a shimmering Tesla Model S, its silver curves slicing through the midday glare like a futuristic dream, sat quietly in the lot. It wasn't just a car, it was a masterpiece, a rolling symbol of innovation, a quiet boast of human brilliance. Inside the nearby deli, a guy named Ryan, a lanky tech nerd with a faded hoodie and a tired slouch, grabbed his turkey sub. This was his moment of peace, a fleeting break from endless coding marathons that stretched his mind thin. That Tesla outside, his pride and joy, bought years ago when life felt simpler, before the world turned into a screaming match over its creator, Elon Musk. Ryan had no idea that stepping back into the heat, sandwich in hand, would hurl him into a nightmare so raw, so unhinged, it'd sear itself into his memory forever. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the asphalt into a shimmering haze, when Ryan's eyes locked onto a sight that hit him like a freight train. A woman stood over his Tesla, her shaved blonde head glinting like a warning beacon, tattoos snaking up her arms like dark vines, massive hoop earrings swaying with every furious move. She wasn't just standing there. She was dragging a key across the hood, her jagged, venomous strokes carving deep gashes into the metal. This wasn't a casual scratch. It was a manifesto, a war cry etched in silver. She moved like a storm, combat boots scuffing the pavement, her whole body trembling with a rage so fierce it seemed to crack the air around her. Ryan froze, his brain stuttering as it tried to catch up. Who does this? Who wakes up, sees a stranger's car, and decides it's their personal punching bag? His sandwich dangled uselessly in his hand as the woman kept going, oblivious to him, lost in her own destruction, muttering under her breath about billionaires and betrayal. Her eyes were wild, darting like she was chasing ghosts only she could see, and her movements had a jagged edge, like a predator tearing into prey. This wasn't random vandalism, this was personal, a pointed middle finger to something massive, something bigger than Ryan or his car. Was it the Tesla itself with its sleek arrogance? Was it the wealth it screamed, the innovation it promised? Or was it Elon Musk, the man who'd built it, the lightning rod whose every word seemed to ignite fury or worship? The air thickened with questions, heavy and unanswered as Ryan stood there, a bystander to his own disaster. His confusion twisted into something sharper, a slow burn flickering to life in his chest. He wasn't the yelling type, not yet, but his pulse hammered, a drumbeat of disbelief and anger building beneath his calm exterior. The woman hadn't seen him, too consumed by her rampage, her combat boots stomping circles around the Tesla like she could crush it into dust. Then she caught his shadow. Spinning on her heel, she faced him, and up close, her defiance hit like a slap. Her cropped hair framed a pale, pinched face, her tattoos flexing with every breath, those oversized earrings clashing against her gothic fury. She looked like she'd been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in her head 1,000 times, a punk warrior ready to burn the world down. Before Ryan could even choke out a "what the hell," she launched into him, her voice a shrill blade slicing through the heat. "Elon Musk," she spat, the name dripping with disgust, a curse hurled at the sky. She called him a transphobe, a Trump-loving sellout, a stain on humanity's soul. Her words flew like shrapnel, each one landing harder, sharper, and Ryan realized this wasn't about his car at all. It was about what it meant to her, a symbol she decided to destroy. What had Musk done to earn this? Was it his tweets, those chaotic bursts of opinion that lit up the internet? His politics shifting like sand under a storm? Or just his sheer, unfiltered existence that drove people to madness? Ryan stood there, sandwich still in hand, letting her tirade crash over him like a wave. He wasn't built for this kind of fight. Years of debugging code had wired him for patience, a quiet strength that now felt like armor. She wanted a reaction, craved it, her eyes blazing for him to snap back, but he didn't give it to her. Not yet. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her, the scratches on his Tesla glinting like war wounds, her rage a gothic spectacle against the mundane parking lot. Why was she so angry? What kind of life, what kind of pain, drives someone to this? To attack a stranger's car over a billionaire's words? The pressure cooker of that moment tightened, her fury boiling over while Ryan stayed cool, a contrast that only fueled her fire. The air crackled with tension as the woman stepped closer, her black-nailed finger jabbing inches from Ryan's chest, trembling with the force of her outrage. She was in his space now, close enough that he could smell the stale coffee on her breath, see the sweat beading along her shaved hairline. Her voice climbed higher, a jagged scream tearing through the parking lot, accusing him of being complicit, a foot soldier in Elon Musk's war on progress. She railed about transgender rights, her words a tangled mess of passion and pain, claiming Musk's offhand comments had stabbed her community in the back. She raged about his cozying up to Trump, spitting that he'd sold his soul, betrayed the dream he'd once sold the world. Each accusation was a hammer strike, her logic drowned in emotion, and she paced like a caged animal, her combat boots stomping as if she could grind the Tesla and Ryan into the pavement. The scratches on the hood weren't enough for her. She wanted blood, or at least shame, and Ryan was her target, the stand-in for every sin she pinned on Musk. He shifted his weight, turkey sub still dangling from one hand, the other shoved in his pocket, his face slack, almost bored. That indifference was gasoline on her fire. She stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing to slits, demanding to know why he wasn't fighting back, why he wasn't defending his precious car or its maker. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until Ryan finally spoke, his voice low and even, cutting through her storm like a knife. He'd bought the Tesla years ago, he said, back when Musk was just a quirky genius, not a political grenade. It was a car, not a vote, and he wasn't about to apologize for driving it. The casual shrug in his tone made her flinch, like he'd slapped her with his calm. She recoiled, then surged forward again, her hoop earrings jangling as she leaned into him, her voice cracking as she called him a coward, a privileged tech bro hiding behind his paycheck, blind to the suffering Musk's words caused. She gestured wildly at the Tesla, its sleek frame now a mangled canvas of her wrath, insisting it was a monument to everything wrong with the world: greed, arrogance, betrayal. Ryan let her unravel, his pulse steady, watching her spin herself into knots. Then he tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, and dropped a bomb that stopped her cold. She was the one feeding Tesla's coffers now, he said. Her vandalism meant insurance payouts, repairs, money flowing right back to the company she despised. The irony was brutal, a razor-sharp twist that hung in the air, and for a split second her face blanked, like a machine short-circuiting. That pause didn't last. She erupted louder, calling him smug, arrogant, a leech on society, her arms flailing, tattoos flexing as she gestured at the car, the sky, anything to claw back her footing. But Ryan didn't budge, didn't raise his voice. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly, letting her scream herself hoarse. The contrast was maddening, her gothic fury against his laid-back defiance, a one-sided war she couldn't win. Shoppers paused at the deli entrance, phones creeping out to record, the air buzzing with their whispers. She noticed, spinning to yell at them too, accusing them of being voyeurs, but it only made her look smaller, more desperate. Ryan swallowed his bite, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and waited. He wasn't done with her yet, and she didn't even see it coming. Her voice shredded the air, a jagged howl that turned heads across the lot. She was a whirlwind now, her shaved blonde head gleaming with sweat, tattoos pulsing as she gestured wildly at the growing knot of onlookers. They'd become her new enemy, these strangers capturing her meltdown in pixelated glory. She accused them of apathy, of laughing at her pain, her earrings swinging like pendulums as she spun between them and Ryan. The Tesla sat there, scarred and silent, a mute witness to her unraveling. She kicked at its tire, a futile jab that sent a jolt up her leg, and for a moment her rage faltered, replaced by a flash of something raw, humiliation, maybe, or exhaustion. But she shoved it down, doubling back to Ryan with renewed venom, her last outburst calling him a leech still hanging unanswered. Ryan stood there, still chewing his sandwich, the picture of nonchalance, his hoodie sagging around his shoulders, his posture loose like he was waiting for a bus instead of facing a human hurricane. She demanded he say something, anything, to prove he wasn't just a smug shell, her voice a cracked whip lashing the air. He finished his bite, wiped his hands on his jeans, and met her glare with eyes that were steady, almost lazy. Then he asked her, voice smooth as glass, when she'd last checked Musk's actual stance on transgender rights. Had she read the tweets herself or just swallowed the outrage whole? The question landed like a sucker punch, quiet but lethal, and the crowd shifted, murmurs rippling through them. She froze, mouth half open, her fury stalling as she scrambled for a comeback, her hands clenching into fists, nails digging into her palms. Ryan didn't stop. He pointed out, still casual, that Musk's Trump support came long after he'd bought the car, years after, in fact. He wasn't riding some red wave bandwagon, he just liked the tech. The logic was simple, unassailable, and it shredded her narrative like tissue paper. She tried to interrupt, her voice climbing again, insisting Musk's money-funded hate now, no matter when the car was bought, but Ryan cut her off, not with volume, but with a slow, deliberate nod like he was humoring a child. Then he hit her again. Every dent she'd put in his Tesla was another paycheck for the company she loathed. She wasn't hurting Musk, she was his unwilling benefactor. The crowd gasped, a few snickers breaking through, and her face flushed a mottled red. She lunged toward him, not to hit but to loom, her shadow falling across his chest as she screamed about privilege, about how he'd never understand her fight. Her breath was hot, ragged, but Ryan didn't step back. He just tilted his head, letting her exhaust herself, then murmured that maybe she should have keyed a gas guzzler instead, bet her optics for her cause. The jab was soft, almost playful, but it stung deep, and the onlookers erupted, some clapping, others whispering. She whirled on them, shrieking for them to shut up, but it was too late. Ryan had turned her into a spectacle, and she knew it. Her hands shook as she backed off, chest heaving, the fight draining out of her like air from a punctured tire. She staggered back, her combat boots scraping the pavement, the crowd's whispers swelling into a low hum of amusement and judgment. Her shaved head glistened under the sun, sweat streaking down her temples, her tattoos stark against skin gone pale. Ryan leaned against the deli wall, arms crossed, his turkey sub long gone, watching her with that same infuriating calm. He asked, almost gently, if she felt better now, if scratching up his car had fixed anything. The question wasn't loud, wasn't cruel, but it shattered what little composure she had left. She lunged forward again, not close enough to touch him, but enough to make the crowd tense, her fists balled as she spat that he didn't get it, that he'd never get it. People like him, with their fancy cars and cushy jobs, were the problem, she screamed, her voice breaking into a hoarse rasp. Ryan didn't blink. He nodded, like he was agreeing with a weather report, and said she might want to check her math. Tesla's repair bills didn't fund Musk's tweets. They paid workers, mechanics, people just trying to eat. She was the one putting money in their pockets, not him. The crowd erupted again, louder this time, a wave of laughter and gasps crashing over her. She spun toward them, screaming for them to stop, but it only made them bolder, a few shouting back, telling her to chill. Her face crumpled, rage giving way to something uglier, shame, maybe, or the dawning realization she'd played herself. She took a step toward the Tesla, then stopped, hands hovering like she wanted to hit it again but knew it was pointless. Ryan pushed off the wall, unfolding his arms, and walked toward her, slow and deliberate, his victory already sealed. The woman staggered back from Ryan, her combat boots scraping the sun-baked asphalt with a sound like a wounded animal dragging itself away. Her chest heaved, each breath a ragged gasp that seemed to pull the last threads of her defiance apart. The crowd's whispers had swollen into a relentless hum, a chorus of amusement and judgment that pressed against her from every angle, suffocating her bravado. Her shaved blonde head glistened with sweat, droplets streaking down her temples and tracing jagged paths across her pale, pinched face. Those tattoos, dark, sprawling vines that had once screamed rebellion, now seemed to wilt against her trembling arms, as if even they were ashamed of her unraveling. Her massive hoop earrings swayed listlessly, no longer pendulums of fury but relics of a fight she'd already lost. She glared at the onlookers, then back at Ryan, her eyes darting like a trapped beast, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Ryan stood there unshaken, his lean frame leaning casually against the deli wall, arms crossed over his faded hoodie. The turkey sub was gone, a crumpled wrapper discarded somewhere in the chaos, but his calm remained, a quiet, unyielding force that mocked her every scream. He just told her to walk away, his voice low and steady, not a hint of gloating in it, but the words carried a weight that crushed her. "You've made your point," he'd said, "whatever it was." It wasn't a taunt, it was worse. It was dismissal, a gentle shove toward irrelevance that left her floundering. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, toward his scarred Tesla. He ran a hand along the scratches, his fingers tracing the jagged lines her key had carved, his expression unreadable, part curiosity, part indifference, all control. She stood frozen, her breath shallow, watching him claim the space she'd tried to destroy. The onlookers weren't filming a crusade anymore. They were capturing a collapse, a Gothic warrior crumbling under the weight of her own rage. She'd lost them, lost everything, and the realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her hands shook as she backed off further, the fight draining from her limbs, leaving her hollow. She turned to the Tesla one last time, its silver frame glinting mockingly in the sun, a silent monument to her failure. Her lips parted, a hoarse croak escaping as she tried to summon one final stand. "It's not about the car," she rasped, pointing a trembling finger at its mangled hood. "It's about what he stands for, what you stand for." But the words sounded thin, rehearsed, a script she'd clung to that no longer held weight. Even she heard it, the hollowness, the desperation, and her shoulders slumped, her combat boots shifting aimlessly as if she didn't know where to go. The crowd didn't care. They turned on her now, their phones still up, but the energy had shifted. A teenage girl with a soda giggled behind her hand, whispering to her friend, and a middle-aged guy in a polo shirt shook his head, muttering something about crazy people. Their judgment wasn't subtle, it was a wall closing in, brick by brick, and she felt everyone. She spun toward them, her voice cracking as she shrieked, "Stop laughing, you don't get it, you're all part of this." But her plea only fueled their amusement, a few snickers breaking into outright laughter. She wanted to be a revolutionary, a punk avenger striking at the heart of oppression, but Ryan's quiet dismantling had turned her into a punchline. Her hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms until tiny crescents of blood bloomed, but she didn't lunge again. She couldn't. The fire was gone, snuffed out by the weight of her own miscalculation. Ryan slid into the driver's seat, the Tesla's door closing with a soft, final thud that echoed louder than her screams ever had. He didn't look at her, didn't need to. His victory was absolute, a silent storm that had swept through her chaos and left her in ruins. The engine hummed to life, a smooth electric purr that drowned out the last murmurs of the crowd. He adjusted his mirror, catching her reflection for a fleeting second, a deflated figure, her shaved head bowed, her tattoos stark against skin gone ghostly pale. Then he pulled out of the parking space, the tires rolling over the pavement she'd claimed as her battlefield, the scratches catching the light as he drove past. They were a jagged reminder of her fury, but they didn't slow him down. He was already gone, back to his lunch break, his life, leaving her behind in a cloud of dust and shame. She watched the Tesla disappear around the corner, its silver frame melting into the shimmer of the afternoon heat. The deli door swung open behind her, a couple of teens stepping out with sodas, glancing her way before snickering and drifting off. The sound snapped her out of her daze, and she turned, shoulders hunching as she shuffled toward the sidewalk. Her boots dragged now, no purpose in their tread, her hands shoved deep into her pockets, hiding the fists that had failed her. She'd come here to hurt Musk, to make Ryan feel the weight of her anger, to strike a blow against a world she despised. But all she'd done was hand him the win. The insurance would cover the damage, Tesla would cash the check, and she'd be left with nothing. No victory, no voice, just a viral video waiting to haunt her. The sun beat down harder, the strip mall quieted, and she faded into the background, a Gothic relic of a war she'd never win. The woman stood rooted to the asphalt, her shadow shrinking as the crowd thinned out, their phones pocketing away with the last scraps of her dignity. Her shaved blonde hair clung damply to her scalp, sweat streaking in rivulets down her neck, pooling in the hollows of her collarbone. Her tattoos, once bold and defiant, seemed to fade into her skin, as if retreating from the humiliation that now defined her. Those oversized hoop earrings dangled like forgotten war trophies, swaying faintly as a hot breeze swept through the parking lot, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and defeat. She stared at the spot where the Tesla had been, its scratched hood no longer there to taunt her, but the image burned into her mind, a mocking ghost that whispered her failure over and over. Her hands stayed limp at her sides, fingers twitching as if they still ached to strike, but the fire that had fueled her rampage was gone, leaving only ashes in its wake. She'd come here with a mission, a blazing purpose that had felt so righteous, so urgent in the heat of her anger. She'd seen that Tesla, its sleek arrogance parked there like a slap in the face, and it had ignited something primal in her, a need to wound something bigger than herself to make the world feel her pain. Elon Musk wasn't just a name to her. He was a symbol, a towering figure whose every tweet, every reckless word had stabbed at her community, her beliefs, her very identity. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, standing up, striking back, being the voice that roared when others stayed silent. But now, as the sun dipped lower and the parking lot emptied, that dream lay shattered around her, scattered like the dust under her combat boots. She wanted to be a hero, a rebel with a cause, but Ryan's unshakable calm had turned her into a villain, or worse, a fool. Her mind replayed the confrontation in agonizing loops, each memory sharper than the last. The way Ryan had stood there, chewing his sandwich like she was background noise, his hoodie sagging around his shoulders, his eyes steady and unbothered. The way he'd asked her about Musk's stance on transgender rights, his voice smooth and cutting, exposing the cracks in her fury. The way he'd pointed out, casual as breathing, that her vandalism was funding the very empire she despised, turning her righteous rage into a cruel joke. She could still hear the crowd's gasps, their snickers, the wave of laughter that had crashed over her like a tidal wave, drowning her in shame. Her chest tightened, a knot of regret and fury twisting together, but there was no outlet now. No car to scratch, no Ryan to scream at, no audience to rally. She was alone, a gothic figure deflated in a war she'd started and lost. The deli door creaked open again, a mother with a stroller emerging, glancing at her with a mix of pity and unease before hurrying away. The woman's lips twitched, a bitter half-smile forming as she realized how she must look, shaved head dripping with sweat, tattoos stark against her pallor, combat boots scuffed and useless. She wanted to be feared, respected, a force of reckoning, but now she was just a curiosity, a cautionary tale whispered about over coffee breaks. Her hands slid into her pockets, fingers brushing against a crumpled pack of cigarettes, and she pulled one out, lighting it with a shaky hand. The first drag burned her throat, a harsh comfort that grounded her in the wreckage of the moment. She exhaled a plume of smoke, watching it curl into the air, dissipate and disappear, just like her stand, her purpose, her pride. Back at his office, Ryan parked the Tesla in its usual spot, the scratches a fresh scar he'd deal with later. He grabbed his laptop bag, slung it over his shoulder and headed inside, already shifting his focus to the code he'd left midline. The confrontation lingered in his mind, a faint buzz like static on a radio, but it wasn't regret or anger, just a story, a strange blip in an otherwise ordinary day. He'd faced her storm and walked away dry, his calm a shield she couldn't pierce. The parking lot war was over, and he'd won without breaking a sweat, leaving her to wrestle with the wreckage she'd made. He didn't gloat, didn't need to. His victory was in his stride, in the way he moved on while she stayed stuck, a prisoner of her own chaos. She took another drag, the cigarette trembling between her fingers, and started walking, away from the deli, away from the parking lot, away from the ghost of the Tesla. Her boots thudded against the sidewalk, a slow, aimless rhythm, each step heavier than the last. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. The world moved on around her, cars honking, birds chattering, the sun sinking into a fiery orange haze. But she was outside it now, a shadow fading into the noise. She wanted to change something, to make a dent in the universe, but all she'd done was scratch a car and lose herself. The video would hit the internet soon, she knew it. Her meltdown preserved forever, a viral scar she'd never outrun. And as the smoke curled around her, she wondered for the first time if she'd been wrong. Not about Musk, not about the fight, but about how she'd fought it. The woman shuffled along the sidewalk, her combat boots dragging with a dull, scraping thud that echoed her defeat. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the strip mall, swallowing her shrinking figure in a pool of dusk. Her shaved blonde hair clung to her scalp, matted with sweat and streaked with the grime of a day gone horribly wrong. Her tattoos, once a badge of defiance, now felt like chains, heavy and useless against her pale, trembling arms. Those massive hoop earrings swayed with every step, a faint jingle that mocked her silence, a reminder of the bravado she'd worn like armor that had shattered under Ryan's quiet, relentless gaze. Her hands stayed buried in her pockets, fingers clenched around the cigarette pack, the last tether to a control she'd lost hours ago. She was a Gothic relic now, a warrior stripped of her cause, left to wander the wreckage of a battle she'd ignited and couldn't win. Her mind was a storm of its own, a churning sea of regret, rage, and raw, aching shame. She replayed every moment of that parking lot clash, each frame sharper, crueler than the last. The Tesla's gleaming silver curves, so pristine before she'd attacked it, now scarred with her fury, a fury she'd thought was righteous, unstoppable. The way Ryan had stood there, lanky and unassuming, his faded hoodie sagging, his turkey sub dangling like a prop in a play she didn't understand. She'd seen him as weak, a privileged tech bro she could break, but he'd turned her weapon against her, his calm a blade that cut deeper than her key ever could. His words echoed in her skull, relentless and unyielding. When you last check Musk's stance on transgender rights, every dent you put in that car is money for Tesla. Maybe you should have keyed a gas guzzler instead. Each line had landed like a sledgehammer, cracking her resolve, exposing the flaws in her rage, turning her into a fool in front of a crowd that had cheered her downfall. She stopped walking, her boots grinding to a halt on a cracked slab of concrete, and lit another cigarette. The flame flickered in the dimming light, casting a brief glow across her face, pale, pinched, hollowed out by exhaustion. She inhaled deeply, the smoke curling into her lungs, a bitter comfort that couldn't erase the truth gnawing at her. She wanted to hurt Elon Musk, to make him feel the pain she carried, the pain of a community she believed he'd betrayed. His tweets, his politics, his unfiltered chaos, they'd fueled her for months, a fire that burned hotter with every headline, every soundbite. She'd seen that Tesla as his avatar, a smug extension of his empire, and she'd attacked it with everything she had. But Ryan had flipped the script, showing her, showing everyone, that her rebellion was a gift to the very system she despised. The insurance payout, the repairs, the money flowing back to Tesla, it was her doing, not his. She'd been the pawn, not the knight, and the realization twisted in her gut like a knife. The crowd's laughter rang in her ears, a haunting chorus she couldn't silence. She could still see their faces, teenagers snickering, shoppers whispering, phones held high like torches at a witch trial. They hadn't seen her as a warrior, they'd seen her as a spectacle, a meltdown to share and mock. She'd screamed at them, begged them to understand, but it had only made her smaller, more desperate. Her hands shook as she exhaled, smoke spiraling into the twilight, and she wondered how it had gone so wrong. She had a plan: strike fast, strike hard, make a statement that would echo beyond that parking lot. But Ryan's indifference had stripped her bare, his logic a mirror that forced her to see herself. Not a hero, not a rebel, but a woman lost in her own anger, lashing out at a world that didn't care. The Tesla's scratches weren't a victory. They were a scar on her soul, a mark of her failure etched in metal and memory. She resumed walking, her steps slower now, each one a surrender to the weight pressing down on her. The strip mall faded behind her, its lights flickering on as night crept in, indifferent to her collapse. She thought about Musk, his wealth, his power, his voice that reached millions while hers barely reached the edge of that lot. She wanted to wound him, to make him pay for the hurt she felt, but he'd never know her name, never feel her rage. Ryan had been her proxy, her target, and even he'd walked away unscathed, his life resuming while hers unraveled. She pictured him now, back at his office, tapping away at his keyboard, the Tesla parked outside with its battle scars, a story he'd laugh about over beers, a footnote in his day. Meanwhile, she was here, a ghost on a sidewalk, her purpose stripped away, her voice drowned out by the hum of a world that had already moved on. The cigarette burned down to its filter and she flicked it away, watching it spark against the pavement before dying out. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a cruel reminder of the inevitable. She pulled it out, hands trembling, and saw the notifications piling up. The video was online already, uploaded by some bystander with a shaky camera and a thirst for likes. Crazy Lady Destroys Tesla in Epic Freakout. The title screamed. The thumbnail a blurry shot of her midran, eyes wild, tattoos flashing. Comments flooded in, "What a psycho, Elon haters are unhinged. This is why we can't have nice things," each one a dagger twisting deeper. She scrolled, unable to stop, her breath hitching as the views climbed. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. Her shame was public now, a viral wound she'd never heal, and she knew it would follow her, haunt her job, her friends, her every step. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, her chest tightening with a sob she refused to let out. The night closed in, stars piercing the sky like cold, distant eyes, and she kept walking, her boots thudding a funeral march. She didn't know where she was headed, home maybe, or nowhere at all. The fight was over and she'd lost everything, her pride, her cause, her voice. Ryan's Tesla rolled on, scratches and all, a quiet testament to a war he'd barely remember, while she carried the weight of it forever. Back at his desk, he typed away, the confrontation a fatting echo, his calm a victory she'd never understand. The world turned, the internet buzzed, and she faded into the noise. A cautionary tale, a gothic shadow, a woman who'd burned too bright and fallen too hard, leaving nothing but ashes and a story that wasn't hers anymore. If you enjoyed this story, check out another video with an even more amazing tale. There's always something exciting waiting for you on our channel. And don't forget, more wonderful stories are coming soon. Hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our upcoming adventures.